I live in a place where the nuts hunt the squirrels. In a place where the nuts hunt the squirrels, ha-ha.
It's a beautiful spot where I don't think a lot. And mostly I don't think of girls like you, hoo-ha. I don't think of girls like you.
When I think of the traffic and horns and lights that flash and signs that blink and say don't walk and subways that roar
And brakes that screech and noisy men drilling holes in the street.
I'm mad for this place where the nuts hunt the squirrels, where the people all smile while they play, ha-ha.
And I spend all my time skipping rocks at the ducks, and I don't think of girls like you, hoo-ha. I don't think of girls like you.
You drove me to this, and you know that you did. To the place where the nuts hunt the squirrels, ha-ha. But I couldn't care less, 'cause my life was a mess. So who needs the human race, ha-ha? I don't need the human race.
I don't have any use for girls like you who tell me what I should say and do and how I should
Cut my hair and shave my shoes and shine my face and live like a nut in the human race.
So I'm mad for this place where the nuts hunt the squirrels, and it's here I shall always remain, ha-ha. It's here I shall always remain, but there's just one complaint I've had so far. They're trying to drive me sane. They're trying to drive me sane. Oh,
they're trying to drive me sane. Ha-ha. They're trying to drive me sane. They're trying to drive me sane. Oh, they're trying to drive me sane. They're trying to drive me sane.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and this is cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You'll also find transcripts of this shortly up on alanwattsentinel.eu. It is October the 11th, 2007. Welcome to the worldwide police state, because that's what we're living in. And we shouldn't be all shocked. We should really take this in a stride, because we've been living in this system, a police state really, for our whole lives. It's just that it's more overt now. It's more out in the open. We fail to realize the histories that led up to where we are today, mainly because it's not taught anymore, at least in the lower schools. It's carefully kept for the old granite Ivy League type universities, where those technocrats, those who help rule society, those who help the elite and work for the elite, are educated. That's where they're taught the real histories, at least the part that they have to know, which is the control of the mind, and the mass mind at that. Sociology, psychology, and all the variations of it, because there are select divisions of psychology for different purposes. And this is well understood, well observed, well documented. And Joe Public is supposed to simply remain a child forever, be educated, be indoctrinated, play his whole life, work in play, and pay for his funeral before he dies, of course, and be a good citizen, consume and produce. Don't make waves. That's the whole point of a well-behaved or beehived society. In the 1800s, after Darwin had been put out front to promote the old inner high Masonic idea of evolution, borrowed from Hinduism, from the old slimy swamp, and evolving upwards through many lifetimes into this select sect of elitists, the same bunch that Plato was referring to when he talked about how his own aristocratic brotherhood understood sciences, the sciences of that time. And he said it's because, well, we've lived before, haven't we? Another idea they'd borrowed from one of the oldest religions, maybe the oldest religion in the known world, at least known to us, because there have been many other ages before this one, before the ice ages, before the previous warming ages, between the ice ages, and on it goes. We don't know how old humankind really is, and all the fake hunts they have for Lucy and the common mother and all this stuff, the Piltdown man and all that kind of thing, all these fakes that they put out there and trained the public to believe in simply don't hold up when they're analysed, as indeed the Piltdown man was. At least the skull was, and it was found to be half pig and half human, stuck together and put in a museum on display for years and taught as fact in school. Well, we all have to believe in evolution so that we can believe there are special types, more superior types that fits in with the Darwinian theory of selective breeding. Those who breed wisely and pick their mates have the better, stronger offspring, the more cunning, the more intelligent, etc. And this whole movement led from that to theosophy. Even Blavatsky adopted it because she was told to. She was only up front as well. Good actress, though. And we find it all the way into the backing of the Soviet system, the Soviet man, the new Soviet man they were going to create, that was all conditioned reflexes and perfected. All superstition would be drummed out of them. They would be products of the state, well-behaved, efficient workers. We find the same thing in Nazi Germany, because Germany was a leading proponent for the Pavlovian techniques. Now that they agreed that God was dead, accepting Nietzsche, then man was just a higher animal, and like all higher animals, he could be trained and reconditioned and made to be what the elite wanted them to be. Now, after saying that, I'm not saying I totally disagree with it, because you see, they have trained most people into being what they want them to be, good producers and consumers, but certainly not thinkers and certainly not individuals. That is why the top schools for universal peace, which are also owned by the elite, they've always said that they'd have to eradicate individuality amongst the populace, because the individual could be aberrant. They could never predict what they're going to do next, and you'd have unforeseen consequences to their actions. Therefore, individuality had to go. In its place was to come, not communism, because that'd be too blatant, so they called it communitarianism, good citizens in your neighborhood, which would eventually become little habitat areas with committees running your lives and deciding what you do and what colors to paint your house and how many cars to have outside your door, and the fact that you couldn't change your oil in your own driveway. That kind of stuff. That was all borrowed from the Soviet system. They just don't call it communism here. It's called communitarianism and good citizenry. So change the terminology, promote it under a goody thing, goody two-shoes, and people accept it quite docilely. That's the system we live in. Now, the study of psychology, mass psychology, is empirical. You can test it. And these tests have been done in all countries and compared with each other. The same test situations with cameras in streets and cameras in schools and cameras everywhere. And people react the same way generally to the same problems, and they try to find the same solutions. And they can also be guided by experts who understand this into conclusions. That's what television is for. That's what radio is for. In fact, that's what all media is for, is to give you what should be your conclusions, the approved conclusions given to you by the elite. They don't want you thinking too deeply about things, but it's also to create short-term memory. They realized a long time ago, centuries ago in fact, when they did the Punch and Judy shows, the old travelling shows with the little booth where the puppeteer would have the 2 or 3 main characters, and they realized that they could not hold the crowd's attention, especially the young, for too long if they went into long diatribes or drama. Therefore they had to shorten it, and they found even then in the puppeteering industry that 3 seconds per actual view without movement was as long as children would watch. Therefore, that went into the cartoon industry, And we'll see now if a child looks away from the television during a particular scene for more than 2 or 3 seconds, they lose the thread of the story. Therefore, they're in rapt attention, they're hypnotized by it, they're glued to it, and the parents can talk to them, and they don't respond, or they'll miss the thread of the story. All psychology, and it's used on a world scale. This is known by some countries that haven't joined in this new world order. It's known by those in the Middle East. It's known by large segments in India, where they even had a national day where they threw out the television sets that had been brought in at cost price. And they realized right away that the TV was meant to change and then dominate your culture. There's one thing about those that plan the world and the type of world they've wanted to come into being, they never give up. And so when something fails, they always have plan B, C, or D, often all working together at the same time, hoping that one or the other or two or all will take off. Therefore we find in places like India, for instance, and even in Africa, the youth go for the cell phone. They make them really, really cheap, give them cheap deals, almost give them away to get them hooked on this, because with that they can also download their various kinds of westernized music and all the other little jingles that come along with it. And that's something I'm going to talk about tonight. Aldous Huxley, a prominent leader, at least in the British world, from the 1930s onwards, in the field of behaviorism. He worked with the Tavistock Institute, one of the top experimental bases for physical manipulation by the insertion of 30-gauge stainless steel wire in the brains of people, where they could manipulate them remotely, or even wired at that time before remotes, but they used remotes as well shortly afterwards. And he was an observer to these experiments. That got him really excited that they could control human behavior. And he always said that they'd used it on mental patients who were psychotic, and so lessened the impact of what they were actually doing on the people who heard it. Well, it's for the betterment of humanity. It's for poor souls that can't take care of themselves, and it'll stop their aberrant behavior, their self-destructive behavior. That's what I'm talking about. They always couch it under the guise of helping or keeping you safe or something like that, you see. Why change the techniques and formulas when they work on most people? But in reality, they were putting electrodes not just in chimpanzees and monkeys' brains. They were putting them into the brains of humans. This eventually was to lead up with interfacing to computer. And they were doing that way back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And then eventually they did do test runs with hooking people up. They called them volunteer prisoners, lifers in Sweden. And that's been published in the newspapers, and interfacing them with the computer. So Huxley was a big player. He also worked for MI5 and 6, as did most of the big authors of the day, because the culture industry was completely controlled and owned by the elite. They never allow anything, especially to do with any kind of information, to go out by itself. That's why you have publishing industries and publication houses. We find that George Orwell, when he tried to publish Animal Farm and 1984, couldn't get them published, even though he had contracts with the major publication houses in England and abroad. The reason being that being groomed for a top socialist leader, as he was, from university onwards, and from the right background, from an upper middle class family of bureaucrats, lifers, intergenerational bureaucrats, he turned against them and tried to expose what they're really all about. And suddenly he found out the publication houses